3.5 years ago, during spring break of 2016, I flew to the Bay Area to learn from some elders. At the time, I was teaching a social justice class at a high school in Chicago, right in the heart of the city. My co-teacher was a colleague named Christine, who many of you now know as my wife, though we weren't together at the time. We were making the trip because there were some revolutionary educators working in and around Oakland and San Francisco who had agreed to spend time teaching us about their work. We spent one of the mornings touring a school called Roses in Concrete. The school, founded by a veteran educator named Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, takes its name from a poem by the rapper Tupac Shakur. Tupac noted on the page on which he wrote the poem that the poem was autobiographical. It's called The Rose That Grew from Concrete, and this is how it goes. Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's laws wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else even cared. For Duncan Andrade, his students were the roses, and their circumstances were the concrete. Like Duncan Andrade, and like virtually all of his staff, and like the students Christine and I taught in Chicago, his students were black and brown. They were growing up in the city. Some were immigrants, or the children or grandchildren of immigrants. Most had very little in the way of material wealth. Roses in Concrete was a radical place. Duncan Andrade, before getting permission from the school board to open the school on the site on which he eventually did build the school, he first sought permission from the tribal elders who had once long ago occupied that same land. In a kindergarten classroom that we toured, the room smelled strongly of sage, and it turned out that we had just missed a cleansing ritual that the teacher had performed. It was a ritual she had been trained to perform by those same tribal elders. On the walls of that kindergarten classroom, the students had colored in pictures of characters from Dr. Seuss books, but had also colored in pictures of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. Duncan Andrade explained to us that his school was built around a simple question: for what? When it came to the school's approach to everything, from the art on the walls to the way they approached testing, to discipline, the question was always, for what? And if the answer wasn't for the children, then the approach wasn't the right approach. Simple as that. He explained that this came from a Cherokee tradition, whereby tribal elders, when discussing a new rule, plan, or policy, would include a final litmus test before they cemented a decision. The last question they would ask always was, is it good for the children? And if the answer was no, then it was back to the drawing board. This, of course, relates directly to the Iroquois tribe's 7th generation rule, which holds that when we make decisions today, we should be thinking about the impact they'll have 7 generations in the future. The rule, as I understand it, is about sustainability, responsibility, legacy. It's about what we pass on to our children, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. One reason is that it is right now, of course, the holiday season. It's a time when families often come together, gifts are often exchanged, memories of childhood often surface. It can be a time of celebration and melancholy, joy and loss. And with the New Year's Eve ball drop, it always ends with the stark reminder that another 365 days have passed. And it's a chance to reflect on what kind of world we're building for the future and for the children who will inherit it. It's also time for Time magazine to name its annual Person of the Year, and this year they've honored teen climate activist Greta Thunberg. She's been, as I'm sure most of you know, crisscrossing the globe, adding her voice to the many voices of Indigenous youth and youth of color across the world who are reminding the adults of just how little we are doing to ensure the future for their generation. When our current president learned of Time's honor, he tweeted that, quote, "Greta must work on her anger management problem. Then go for a good old-fashioned movie with a friend. Chill, Greta, chill." Thunberg responded in her trademark way by editing her Twitter bio. It now reads, "A teenager working on her anger management problem, currently chilling and watching a good old-fashioned movie with a friend." I've also been thinking about what we pass on to the next generation because, as many of you know, Christine and I welcomed our first child a few months ago. Our daughter Alexis actually turns 100 days old today. I know, cool, right? She's alert and observant, and strong and funny, and her arrival has upended our lives in more ways than I can describe. No one else in the world makes me smile as often or as goofily as she does, and also, I now know what fear feels like. Now that Alexis is here, the conversation between Christine and I about the next generation in our family is no longer theoretical. Now, as we try to map out our future, she's sitting on one of our laps, or leaning on one of our shoulders, or nestled nearby, asleep, though often not for long. And it was during these conversations, as I shared with most of you a few days ago, that Christine and I decided that when our lease is up next summer, it's probably time to move back to Chicago. There's a whole generation of tiny little cousins waiting for her there, and a dozen people nearby we could call in an emergency, and bigger, much cheaper apartments. There's also far less excellent theater and more segregation, and the pizza is ridiculous. It's absurdly cold a lot of the time, and of course, all of you won't be there, so it was a hard decision. But we've always known that this is where we'd probably end up. The plan isn't 100% locked in yet. There are still a few moving pieces, but it's close enough that I've decided to step down from the role as Director of Religious Education next June. And I wanted to let you all know now before I head out on family leave so that the congregation has plenty of time to find the next DRE. This brings me to the final and most obvious reason I've been thinking about what we pass on to the next generation, which is that for the last 2.5 years, it's been my job. As the Director of Religious Education here at Fourth Universalist, the parents and families and members of this congregation have trusted me to build a program that is safe and consistent, that is high quality, that is aligned with the mission and values of this church. More recently, you've also entrusted me with the task of building excellent and diverse adult educational programming as well. I've had a lot of time to think about how to make what we do here good for the children, and I've had a lot of time to think about what we are passing on to the next generation. We've come a long way together. I'm not going to even get into the stories of what things were like just a few years ago, but if you want to find some veteran members and ask them what RE was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you'll get a chuckle. Our volunteer teacher team now is cohesive and dedicated. They have each other's backs. They care deeply about the kids. Our staff is rock solid. In fact, we're promoting Colin Wolfe to assistant DRE, and next year we'll be celebrating Indra Payne's 25th year of service here at Fourth Universalist. Yeah. So please give her hugs and high fives when you see her, and rest assured that we'll do something special next year. Our staff is also growing. We've recently been able to hire 3 of our best volunteers, Katie Garcia, who you just saw, Alex Gordon, who you just saw, and also Cynthia Littleton. They're becoming lead teachers during our Sunday school. And this is another way in which we're investing in our people. More specifically, we're investing in our children by investing in the adults who have already proven that they're invested in those children. And since I'm heading out on family leave this week and will be gone for 3 months, 2 more wonderful members of our RE ministry team, Shannon O'Grady and Kate Scalisi, are also temporarily joining staff just for the next 3 months. Shannon will oversee children and youth RE. Kate will oversee adult RE while I'm away. We now have 5 Sunday classes for children ages 0 through 18. In January, we'll launch our first coming of age class in several years. We have a new guest speaker series called In Conversation, a monthly yoga class that will run January through June. A set of folks trained in our racial justice workshops, ready to start leading institutional transformation, and a variety of other new and exciting offerings, from workshops on topics as diverse as sexual consent and death, to a building your own theology class, and more. We are slowly but surely building the beloved community we want to see in the world. And as we do, we build a better future for the little ones who won't be little for long, a more healthy future, a more educated future, a more anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural future. We also still have so much more room to grow. Room to grow when I return in mid-March, room to grow before then while I'm on leave, and room to grow when I step out of the role in June and beyond. What would it mean if this place became a place where we truly asked, is it good for the children? Every time we made a decision as a community. What if we all saw it as our job to ask this question? Because ultimately, one day, all of this will not be ours. It will be theirs. and so it is already theirs. Would we think differently about how we treat the children during worship, for example, or during coffee hour? Would we think more deeply about whether we intend to raise young people who are exposed to Unitarian Universalism or young people who are going to become Unitarian Universalists? That question is a bit of a third rail for any UU-DRE. Would we make more of an effort to go out of our way to bring a casserole, something that I myself have repeatedly failed to do in this role, to the family with the new baby, or the family with the sick member, or the family mourning a loss? Would we find ways to be more welcoming when new families and new children came through our doors? Would we find ways to connect our children more intentionally with our elders, to be more truly multi-generational? Would we tackle tougher questions with them sooner and more frequently? And which children would we be asking about anyway? Just the children in this space? Just the roses in front of us? Or all the roses, including those growing in New York's gardens and those growing in New York's concrete? Would we ask, for example, about the day school that shares our building just behind this wall and charges $25,000 of tuition each year? Would we ask what financial aid they do and don't offer, and what students are and aren't served as a result? Would we ask whether the event partners that rent this space during the week, and in doing so, just to be totally clear, along with the day school, pay my salary? Would we ask ourselves if those partners are aligned with our values and dedicated to the work of building a better world for our children? Would we ask whether they treat their wait staff with dignity so that the wait staff can in turn go home to their children, also New York roses, with their heads held high? By the way, when I say these things, I know that I'm a straight, white, middle-class male and that I have the social capital and the privilege to pose challenging questions in this way. I do know that I can be a bit much sometimes. Perhaps the best reaction to my departure so far, amidst all of the heartfelt well wishes that I've received, was when Indra, who runs the nursery, said, "You will be so missed here, even though we want to kill you sometimes." Anyway, I don't have the answers to any of these questions that I've posed, and they're certainly not the only questions. I do know, though, that I've discussed almost all of these with some, even many of you, and that those conversations are 1,000 planted seeds, just as so many of you have planted brilliant, loving seeds in me. And some will grow into saplings and then trees, the trees that populate the earth that our children are already in the process of inheriting. I can't thank you enough for trusting me with your children and with so much more over these last few years. Thank you also for the food that you paid for or sent or brought in person when Alexis was born and we couldn't even contemplate cooking. For the little notes of thanks that you've emailed me over the years, often out of the blue. For the many times that you've made sure things go smoothly when I was absent on a Sunday. Please know that none of this has gone unnoticed. There are so many excellent human beings in this room right now, and I'm glad that I'm raising my daughter in the world that you're building. Please keep going. I appreciate you. I love you. I wish you all the best this holiday season, and then I will see you in March.